Republican consultant Vinny Minchillo, thank you so much. Welcome back to Eye on Politics.
Thanks, Jack.
So here we are a week after the March 3rd primary. What did you make of the Cornyn-Paxton result? Everybody knew those two were going to end up in a runoff.
Right.
But what did you make? I think a lot of people were surprised that Cornyn came out ahead of Paxton.
You know, I was surprised by two things. That obviously whisker close race by, less than 2 points. But I was surprised that Cornyn came out ahead of Paxton. And I was really surprised how poorly Paxton performed in his home county in Collin County.
That's right, because he actually was behind Cornyn most of the night. Overnight, he came back and he won by 900 votes.
Right.
And so what does that say to you?
That says to me a couple of things. He's got problems in Collin County, but certainly Collin County knows him best, both the good and the bad. I don't know if you can extrapolate that to the whole state, but to me, that would be a red flag if I was the Paxton campaign.
So now they go into a runoff. We've already seen them, Paxton going after Cornyn by digging up more quotes from before that, were not so nice to President Trump, the border wall. Even I saw something on the whole Justice Kavanaugh, before he was confirmed, saying Christine Blasey Ford seemed credible to Senator Cornyn, et cetera. And then Senator Cornyn is hitting hard on Paxton's ethics and personal problems, legal problems, et cetera. So here we go again, right?
Yeah.
More of the same?
It's right. And the Cornyn campaign did something I've never seen, a 6-minute long attack ad. That's a lot of attacks. That's a lot of stuff to dump on somebody. I think what's really interesting about this election is often in a runoff election in Texas, the strategy and the job is to get your voters who voted for you in the primary to come back out and vote for you again. This seems like a completely different situation. We're re-prosecuting and rerunning the race with all new attacks, all new information, and they're going at it hammers and tongs.
So what do you, if let's say you were advising the candidates, which you're not, but if you were, how would you advise Cornyn to run? How would you advise Paxton to run? And what do each need to do to win?
Well, I think they're both doing a lot of smart things right now. I think Cornyn has always been a very disciplined candidate, and they are sticking to their message and hitting Paxton on the personal issues, the ethical issues, and they are going to hit and hit and hit and hit. And I think Paxton has been very smart, about showing how he's aligned with the president much more than Cornyn is. So he's going to bring his voters back out. And this week we saw, or last week we saw, the SAVE Act, Paxton talking about the SAVE Act and how that was the one thing he needed in order to get him out of the race. Talk about that a little more.
Yeah, I did want to talk about that, but first we got to talk about President Trump coming out and saying he's going to endorse in this race. And then he seemed to get upset with Ken Paxton, who went on a program hours after he said he was going to make an endorsement in this race, saying, "I'm not leaving this race."
Right.
And the president said that's not good for him to say that. And so before we talk about the SAVE Act, what did you make of the president coming out and saying this? And what kind of impact would that have when the president does make an endorsement, if he does?
Right. And I think he will. He usually, when he says he's going to do something, he will do it. But I will tell you, the Paxton people feel like there is a world where they win the runoff even if President Trump endorses Cornyn. So that's their opinion over there. But I think if the president comes out, he was very smart in his statement, because he said he's not only going to endorse, but he expects the non-endorsed candidate to pull out of the race. So it's sort of a twofer. If he endorses John Cornyn, he's got to make the second half of that come true and get Paxton out of the race. I'm not sure that's going to be so easy.
And as far as Paxton then reset the argument, and making it all about the SAVE Act, which is something that President Trump wholeheartedly supports. And talk to me about the politics behind that. Was that a really brilliant move on the Paxton part?
Very good move on their part. For the most part, Cornyn and Paxton, if you look at their voting record, despite the ads and everything they say, their voting records would be very, very similar in the Senate. I don't think there's any big things they would be apart on, except for this. I mean, there's a perception that John Cornyn is holding up the SAVE Act. Whether he is or not, we don't know. And then Paxton, of course, very wholeheartedly in favor of the SAVE Act and to support President Trump. So for the Paxton people, very smart move. It aligns him completely with President Trump and puts him across the table from John Cornyn. Of course, Cornyn today, as we talk, has written an op-ed in the New York Post, basically saying that he wants to pass the SAVE Act. Does that neutralize this threat? We'll have to see as the day goes on.
Senator Mike Lee of Utah came out last week and said, yes, Senator Cornyn has favored the SAVE Act from the beginning. So does that also neutralize?
It's really tough because now we're starting to get into processy things, and voters don't like processy things. So it's kind of like for a voter, I think voters want to know, gee, is Cornyn with Trump on this or not with Trump on this? Was he against Trump and now he's with Trump? I think how that is messaged is really what voters are going to look at.
And does this put more pressure on Senate Majority Leader John Thune? That's what I thought was the most fascinating dynamic of this whole thing. Was Thune and other Senate Republicans have pressured President Trump to back and endorse Cornyn, and now with Paxton, this puts more pressure on Thune to get the SAVE Act passed.
Right.
And so the squeeze is really on Thune.
It sounds like the deal is on the table. And right, Thune has not really wanted to change the fundamentals of the Senate, and the Senate is a very traditional body. They don't necessarily like to change things. But there's the deal, and certainly the president's a deal maker of all deal makers, and that's the deal he wants.
Last question on this, and that is, how do you expect this to shake out? Not to put you on the spot or anything.
If I knew that, no. I think, look, President Trump is a guy who usually gets what he wants, and he usually gets especially from John Cornyn and from Ken Paxton. So depending on what he wants, I think the president will get it. If I had a crystal ball, I think the president will get the SAVE Act passed. I think he will endorse John Cornyn, and I think he will get Ken Paxton out of the race.
Wow. Okay. Well, we shall see.
I've been wrong before, even today. So.
But that would be very interesting. But wouldn't that annoy a lot of Republican voters?
Well, it could. And that's the test of the Trump power. If Trump's going to have to explain this, he's going to have to sell this to Texas grassroots conservatives who were supporting Paxton. So he's not going to be able to do this and just go, all right, we're done. He's probably going to have to come to Texas and make a sale.
So let's talk about the Democratic primary, in which James Talarico, the state representative from Austin, had a pretty convincing win over Dallas Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett. What did you make of those results?
I wasn't surprised by that at all. I think between those two campaigns, you've got the Talarico campaign, very well funded, very well organized. Really good boots on the ground, lots of volunteers. They had infrastructure, and I think that was probably one of the biggest differences between the campaigns. And I think Talarico's appeal is a little broader. Plus, he's had a little bit more time. So the results from the primary, really not a surprise.
It also seemed as if his campaign really took off even more so after the whole controversy over the Stephen Colbert interview.
Right.
Which then we learned last week, the New York Times anyway, reported that Talarico knew that wasn't going to make air anyway, and that it was just going to air on YouTube, etc., and was waiting for Colbert to blow this up.
Right.
Smart move?
Brilliant move. And I think not his interview being canceled off the air was even better than if it had run on the air. So it's very good. His media savvy is really, really impressive. I mean, remember, this all started with him going on Joe Rogan.
Yes.
Who's certainly a right-leaning podcaster, and he did 2 hours on Joe Rogan very impressively. So and then the Colbert thing, very, very smart. He's a good player. That's why we wanted Crockett in the general instead of Talarico.
So let's talk about the comments that his past comments have now come out in the week after the primary,
Sure.
where in which he talks about a lot of things that I'm wondering the Republicans are really trashing his comments big time. Is this going to make a difference in the fall election?
Oh, I think it'll make a huge difference. I think Talarico now just has to own his record, and he's been on the wrong side of a lot of voters on boys playing in girls sports, on trans issues, on a lot of the big national Democrat issues. He's got some things where he has come to the middle to try to meet Republicans, but there's still plenty of stuff on the left that he's going to have to own.
So he can't disavow any of his statements.
It'll be
Can't
tough.
wipe them clean.
Right.
And so when you say own them, what does that mean?
Well, look, there's a point to where he's going to have to take credit for, some of these more onerous issues, and he's not going to be able to get away with a Bible quote to kind of paper that over. So he's in a tough race. This is going to be, if the race against Crockett was the toughest race of his life, this one's going to be 100x tougher. Right after the primary, the NRSC came and dropped a load of nasty messages on him, and they're going to keep on going till the fall. He's going to have his hands full.
Is this going to matter at the end of the day?
I think a lot of it depends on the matchup, and I've stuck with that from the beginning. I think if this is a Cornyn-Talarico matchup, the Talarico people can pack up the tents and go home. I think this is I don't want to say easy win for Cornyn. It's still going to be close, but I think it's a much less dramatic race. If it's Paxton-Talarico, then there's a group that they're going to have to fight over. And for me, those are suburban moms who normally vote Republican but are not willing to vote for Paxton. That's a group that Talarico must pick up in order to have any hopes of winning.
And what is the danger then to Republicans? You see a lot of suburban women just staying home, not voting at all.
Right, now that's a big problem. We want them to come out and vote. So I think for suburban women, they will have, again, if it's Paxton Talarico, they will have to make the choice of, gee, do I vote for Paxton, who I have problems with? Do I vote for Talarico, who I have problems with? Or do I just not vote in the race at all, not come out at all?
Now, Paxton has said these are all scare tactics, and
Right.
I've been in tough races before, and I've won. He won back in 2022. He was in a runoff in 2022. Then he won pretty handily in 2022, but that was a good year for Republicans.
Right.
2026 may not be.
And
Likely not.
I've certainly heard the Paxton people say this, and they have data points to back that up. And while Ken Paxton's won every race he's ever been in, he's never been in a tough general against a good, well-funded opponent. It's just never happened. This will be the first time. So really, all bets are off. Now, I do think if it's Paxton Talarico, Paxton does win. I think we have to spend $200 million to get him over the line, but I think he does win in a close race.
Now, is that $200 million from the runoff through November? That's $200 million just for that.
Just for that.
Okay.
And here's the tough part. That's $200 million that Republicans would much rather spend in North Carolina, Maine, Georgia, and other places with competitive seats. A competitive Texas Senate seat was not on the bingo card for this year.
We will leave it there. Vinny Minchillo, Republican consultant. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
We appreciate it.
Good.